New Zealand Herald editorial. Business New Zealand move may not end fair pay agreements, but government has dropped the pretence. Michael Wood's response to news that Business New Zealand is refusing a central role in the government's flagship industrial relations reforms may have revealed the truth about fair pay agreements. Rather than agreements to create better working conditions, the reforms are about Labour giving structural importance to the union movement and paying it to do so. On Thursday, Kirk Hope, Chief Executive of the closest thing New Zealand has to a peak body for business interests, said that it would turn down $250,000 a year in taxpayer funding and refuse to be the default party negotiating fair pay agreements. The agreements promised by Labour since 2017 are supposed to see business and unions thrash out terms for a given sector of occupation that are above the minimum standards required by law. Wood, the Workplace Relations Minister, dismissed the moves as unsurprising and almost irrelevant. The specified part of the system that Business New Zealand have said that they will not engage with is a fairly small aspect of the framework and will not have a major impact, Wood said. In the vast majority of cases, the government expected industries to negotiate for themselves, and Business New Zealand act only as a backstop for industries that could not negotiate, and in any case, the Employment Relations Authority would ultimately decide where agreements cannot be reached. The statement arguably contradicts Wood's cabinet paper, which suggests Business New Zealand would hold an utterly central role in the system. The peak bodies in many sectors have, at the most, a handful of staff. If Business New Zealand is not going to play the central role, it is unclear who will. Wood is hopelessly optimistic to suggest anything at all about the vast majority of fair pay agreements. The agreements were supposed to be in place before the last election. Even though Labour has a majority in Parliament, it is looking increasingly unlikely any will be struck before the next one. Fair pay agreements were never about agreement with business, and the only surprise about Business New Zealand's move is that it took so long. The agreements allow unions to initiate agreements in areas where they have little membership, forcing business to the table for negotiation. As workplaces become increasingly flexible and the types of jobs offered become increasingly complex, agreements covering an entire sector or occupation will either have little meaning or will restrict employment patterns from changing. What fair pay agreements will do is put unions at centre stage, giving them $250,000 a year to be resourced not only to argue over conditions, but also search out sectors to act for. Wood says the Employment Relations Authority will ultimately decide where the agreement cannot be reached anyway, which begs the question, if the government really sees an issue of being about unacceptable wages and conditions in the workplace, why not address these conditions or form a body to come up with the standards it believes are necessary? The answer to the fair pay agreements are more about union involvement than about workers' conditions. At least now, Wood has dropped the pretense about the reforms being about agreement.